How many seconds do you have when you realize you're alone, surrounded, and your radio's dead? Not hypothetically. Not in a training scenario where an instructor blows a whistle when you make the wrong call. Right now. In a place your country swears you're not. Against an enemy that takes no prisoners. With 12 men closing in and the nearest friendly force 3 kilometers through triple canopy jungle that might as well be 300. What do you do? Specialist 4-class James Brackett, 24 years old, Tupelo, Mississippi, didn't have time to ask that question. He was too busy counting muzzle flashes in the undergrowth. 12, maybe 13. His XM-177E2 was pressed against his chest. Selector switch already on full auto. 30 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. He'd been with MACV-SOG's Command and Control North for 11 months. Long enough to know that survival wasn't about firepower. It was about making the enemy believe you were something you weren't. Long enough to understand that the official denial of his existence meant nobody was coming to pull him out. Long enough to have watched better men than him get buried in unmarked graves with medals their families would never see. The NVA patrol had been tracking him for 40 minutes. Professional, disciplined. The kind of unit that didn't make noise or break interval. He'd tried to shake them at the stream crossing. Didn't work. Tried to double back through a bomb crater. They anticipated it. Now they had him flanked on 3 sides with his back against a limestone ridge that offered exactly 0 escape routes. This channel exists because some stories don't fit in official histories. Not because they're classified, though many are, but because they force us to confront what we ask 19 and 24-year-olds to become when we send them to places we later pretend they never went. If you're here, you already know that courage isn't clean and survival isn't simple. Subscribe now and join those who refuse to let these experiences disappear into footnotes and redacted files. The men who lived them deserve better than silence.
James Brackett hadn't planned on becoming the kind of soldier who operated in places that didn't exist. He'd enlisted in 1966 because his father, a decorated Korean War veteran, told him that if the draft was coming anyway, he might as well choose his path. Basic training at Fort Benning, advanced individual training as a radio operator, then orders to Fort Bragg and a recruiter who never identified which unit he represented. The pitch was simple. Volunteer for classified reconnaissance operations in Southeast Asia, or ship out to a line infantry unit in the Central Highlands. Brackett chose the unknown, not because he was reckless, because he understood that radio operators in regular units had a life expectancy measured in weeks once the enemy figured out who was calling in artillery. MACV-SOG changed him. Not the way boot camp changes a civilian into a soldier. The way isolation changes a man's relationship with fear. He learned to sleep with one eye open, to move through jungles so quietly that monkeys didn't notice him, to read terrain the way most men read newspapers, understanding what the high ground meant, where water collected, which routes the enemy would use because humans are predictable even when they're trying not to be. His hometown in Mississippi felt like another planet. Letters from his girlfriend stopped coming after 6 months. She'd written that she couldn't handle not knowing where he was or when he'd be back. He didn't blame her. He barely knew those answers himself. The men he worked with became his only family. Recon Team Python, 6 Americans, 4 Montagnard Scouts. They'd run 23 missions together across the border into Laos and Cambodia. Interdiction operations against the Ho Chi Minh Trail, prisoner snatches, trail watches that lasted 10 days without resupply. Their team sergeant, Staff Sergeant Mike Hodges, Bakersfield, California, 31 years old, 2 tours, had saved Brackett's life in April when an NVA patrol stumbled onto their hide site. Hodges put himself between Brackett and 3 AK-47s, took 2 rounds in the chest, and kept fighting long enough for the team to break contact. He died on the extraction bird before they cleared Laotian airspace. Brackett made a promise at Hodges' memorial. "Nobody else on the team goes home in a bag while I'm still breathing." 3 weeks later, Recon Team Python inserted 20 kilometers inside Laos to monitor a suspected logistics hub on the trail. The mission was supposed to be pure observation. 72 hours, no contact. Get the intelligence and get out. But the NVA knew someone was there. Maybe they'd been compromised. Maybe the North Vietnamese had gotten better at counter-reconnaissance. Either way, on the second night, mortar fire walked through their position with precision that suggested forward observers had eyes on them. The team split during the chaos. Brackett and 2 Montagnards broke east. The rest went south. They were supposed to link up at a pre-designated rally point. Brackett never made it to the rally point. The 2 Montagnards with him got hit by a trailing enemy element 6 hours into the escape and evasion. He tried to cover their withdrawal. By the time the gunfire stopped, they were gone, and his radio took a round through the handset. No comms, no team, no extraction, just him and whatever he could carry. He didn't know what happened to Hodges' promise until 12 NVA regulars found him 2 days later in a place he couldn't run from. Stories like this don't survive in official after-action reports. They survive because people choose to remember them. If you served in Southeast Asia, or knew someone who did, or if you've studied what really happened in the classified operations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the comment section below isn't just a place to type. It's where these memories live on. Add yours, share what you know, honor the men who operated in the silence. The 12 men hunting James Brackett weren't conscripts. They were soldiers of the 312th NVA Regiment, a unit that had been fighting foreign powers for 20 years, first the French, then the Americans. Their squad leader, Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Thao, 36 years old from a village outside Hanoi, had survived the Tet Offensive and earned a reputation for methodical professionalism. He didn't underestimate Americans the way younger officers did. He'd seen what happened to units that treated enemy reconnaissance teams as easy targets. The Americans who operated out here weren't line infantry. They were hunters who knew the jungle as well as any Vietnamese soldier. Maybe better, because they had technology and training that turned ordinary men into ghosts. Thao's men were confident because they had reason to be. They'd spent the last 6 months securing the trail's most critical logistics corridor, a route that moved 70 tons of supplies south every week. Weapons, ammunition, rice, medical supplies, everything the southern battlefields needed to sustain operations against ARVN and American forces. They'd killed or captured 4 enemy reconnaissance teams in the last 3 months. Always the same pattern: isolate, surround, overwhelming firepower. None of those teams had escaped. Thao saw no reason this would be different. One American, alone, wounded or running, exhausted. His men had fresh legs, superior numbers, and intimate knowledge of this terrain. They were not cruel men. They were professional soldiers doing their duty to protect the lifeline that kept their country's war effort alive. But Thao's radio man had reported something unusual an hour earlier. The American wasn't running in a straight line the way panicked men did. He was moving tactically, doubling back, using terrain to break line of sight, setting false trails. It suggested training and discipline. It suggested someone who understood he was being hunted and refused to make it easy. Thou respected that. War was easier when your enemy was incompetent. It was harder, more dangerous, when your enemy knew what he was doing. For the United States, the stakes went far beyond one missing soldier. MACV-SOG's mission in Laos was strategic denial. Prove to Hanoi that the Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't untouchable. Every supply convoy destroyed, every cache found, every NVA logistics officer killed. It all fed into a larger calculation in Washington about whether the trail could be interdicted enough to strangle North Vietnam's ability to wage war in the South. If SOG operators could move freely in denied territory, gather intelligence, and survive, it justified continued cross-border operations. If they died or got captured, it handed Hanoi a propaganda victory and proved that American technological superiority couldn't overcome Vietnamese determination and knowledge of the ground. For Brackett personally, the stakes were simpler but no less absolute. Survival, not capture. SOG operators knew what happened to prisoners taken in Laos: torture, show trials, years in cages, or just a bullet in a jungle clearing that nobody would ever find. His training had been clear. If you can't escape and extraction is impossible, make them pay so dearly that the enemy thinks twice before engaging the next American reconnaissance team they encounter. Make them believe one SOG operator is worth a platoon. Make them afraid. The promise he made to Hodges burned in his chest. Nobody else goes home in a bag. But he was the one surrounded now, the one who might not make it home at all. What would success even look like in this situation? How do you win when winning means staying alive long enough to find a radio and call for extract? When the enemy has you flanked, and your only advantage is that they don't yet know exactly where you are. I'll be direct. YouTube buries military history unless viewers engage. Your subscription tells the platform these stories deserve reach. Subscribe now and hit that like button. It's how the algorithm knows this matters. If you believe honest history about classified operations should be preserved, this is how you make it happen. Join those who refuse to let these experiences fade. Touch came first. The limestone ridge pressed against Brackett's back, rough, unforgiving, still holding the afternoon heat even though dusk was settling over the jungle. Sweat soaked through his tiger-striped fatigues, mixing with the red clay dust that covered everything in this part of Laos. His hands found the XM-177E2's pistol grip. The weapon was an extension of his body after 11 months, 30 rounds. He did the math without thinking. If every round found a target, he'd still be 3 short. If combat efficiency dropped to the average 60% hit rate under stress, he'd be lucky to drop 6 of them, 12 against 1. The rifle's barrel was still warm from the contact 2 hours ago. His fingers traced the 3 notches carved into the handguard. 3 confirmed kills on this deployment. Hodges had told him to stop keeping score. You're not hunting deer, Jimmy. You're trying to stay alive. Sound built in layers. First, the jungle's baseline. Insects, birds settling for the night, the distant rush of a stream cutting through the valley below. Then, the wrongness. Silence spreading like a stain as wildlife recognized predators moving through the undergrowth. Bootsteps. Careful. Disciplined. Not the crashing noise of amateurs. These men knew how to move. Brackett counted intervals between steps, estimated distance, 60 meters in closing, 45 seconds until contact. His breathing slowed, controlled. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. The way they taught him at Bragg. Panic kills faster than bullets. Vision sharpened in the fading light. Movement at 10 o'clock, 50 meters, a shadow that didn't belong. Then another at 2 o'clock. Classic L-shaped ambush formation. They were setting up to pour fire into his position from 2 directions simultaneously. Textbook tactics. Thao, if that was their leader, knew his business. Brackett's eyes tracked to the low ground 30 meters downslope. A shallow depression, maybe a bomb crater from B-52 strikes. If he could reach it before they opened up, he'd have cover and force them to come to him. Big if. The moment he moved, they'd light him up. But staying here meant dying in place. Smell hit him like a physical thing. The jungle's rotten earth scent mixed with something else. Nuoc Mam, fish sauce. The North Vietnamese carried it to supplement their rice rations, strong enough to track by smell if you knew what you were looking for. They were close enough that he could smell their last meal. Close enough to smell the gun oil on their AK-47s. Close enough to hear breathing if they stopped moving. Taste. Copper on his tongue. Blood from where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek during the earlier firefight. Adrenaline left a metallic aftertaste that veteran soldiers recognized. His mouth was dry. Canteen empty since morning. He worked saliva around his teeth and spat. No time for thirst. Then the first shot cracked out. Not aimed at him. A ranging shot into the bush 20 meters to his left. Testing, seeing if he'd panic and return fire, giving away his exact position. Thao's men were smart. They knew he was in this area but hadn't pinpointed him yet. Another shot, closer, 10 meters right. Bracketing fire. They'd walk rounds into his position until they found him. Brackett made his decision. The crater. Now. He launched himself downslope, legs pumping, low and fast. The jungle erupted. Muzzle flashes from multiple positions, rounds snapping overhead, tearing through vegetation. He felt the pressure wave of bullets passing inches from his head. A branch exploded next to his face. Wood splinters cut his cheek. He hit the crater's lip and rolled. XM-177E2 tucked tight against his chest. Incoming fire chewed the ridge he'd just abandoned. They dumped at least 40 rounds into where he'd been standing 3 seconds ago. From the crater, he had 2 seconds of tactical advantage. They'd just revealed their positions. Muzzle flashes burn into your retina. 6 shooters on the left flank, 4 on the right. 2 more somewhere in the center. He processed it like a snapshot. His training took over. Identify the biggest threat first. The center position. Probably Thao coordinating the assault. Take out the leader and the attack loses cohesion. Brackett rose just enough to acquire targets. His rifle came up. Selector switch still on full auto. He picked his angle. Not the obvious frontal assault. He shifted right, using the crater's lip for cover, and opened up on the right flank's trailing man. The XM-177E2 hammered. Short burst. 5 rounds. The NVA soldier went down. Brackett shifted fire left before anyone could react. Another burst. Another man down. He was already moving again before return fire found his position. The enemy's response was immediate, but confused. They'd expected one direction of fire. Brackett was giving them 3. Move. Shoot. Move. Never stay still. The 40-second contact drill they ran until muscle memory took over. He dumped 15 rounds in 8 seconds and displaced 20 meters laterally. The NVA poured fire into where he'd been. He used their distraction to flank further. His magazine ran dry. Reload. 2 seconds. Fresh mag. 30 more rounds. That's when Lieutenant Thao understood. This wasn't a desperate soldier trying to escape. This was a counterambush, executed by someone who'd trained for exactly this scenario. Thao screamed orders in Vietnamese, regroup, establish base of fire, but it was too late. Brackett had seized the initiative. He'd figure out later why he'd been alone. Right now, there was only the next 3 seconds, the next target, the next breath. Survival wasn't a plan. It was a series of micro-decisions made faster than thought, and James Brackett was very, very good at making those decisions. But this was only the beginning. 12 men, 1 soldier, 2 minutes. The math didn't favor anyone. For maybe 10 seconds, Brackett thought he might actually pull this off. 6 NVA soldiers down, 6 left. The right flank had collapsed. The left was pinned behind a fallen teak tree trunk, unable to advance without exposing themselves. He'd burned through 60 rounds, 2 magazines, and his tactical vest held 4 more. Enough. The enemy's fire had gone from aggressive to suppressive. They weren't trying to kill him anymore. They were trying to keep him fixed in place while they maneuvered. Classic infantry tactics. He could read it in the pattern of fire, short bursts, spaced intervals. Someone, Thao probably, was repositioning for a flanking attack. Brackett allowed himself 1 full breath. In, out. His hands were steady, no shakes. Adrenaline was still flowing but under control. He thought about Hodges, about the promise, about recon team pythons scattered across 20 kilometers of hostile jungle. If he survived this, he'd find them. If they survived, they'd find him. That's how SOG operated. Nobody left behind, even when behind meant deep in enemy territory with no support and no hope of quick extraction. The jungle had gone quiet again, unnatural quiet, the kind that meant violence was coming. He couldn't see movement, but felt it. Sixth sense developed after months in the bush. Someone was closing on his position, left side, using the undergrowth for cover. 30 meters, 25, moving with patience and skill. Brackett shifted his rifle's barrel a fraction of an inch, waited, breathing shallow, still as the limestone at his back. Then he heard it. A sound that changed everything. Radio chatter, Vietnamese, clipped, urgent, calling for reinforcements. He didn't speak the language but understood the tone. Thao had radioed for help, which meant a platoon, maybe more, was already moving toward this position. Brackett's tactical advantage had a countdown timer, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. However long it took for 30 fresh NVA soldiers to arrive, and then the impossible choice revealed itself. Movement to his right, not NVA, wrong silhouette, wrong gear, American, one of his Montagnard scouts, Trung, 20 years old, from a village the NVA had burned 2 years ago, alive, wounded, trying to reach Brackett's position. The Montagnard's left arm hung useless. Blood soaked his shirt. He was moving on pure will, 50 meters away, exposed, crossing open ground. If Brackett opened fire on the NVA to cover Trung's approach, he'd give away his position completely. The 6 remaining enemy soldiers would concentrate fire and kill them both. If he stayed quiet, Trung might make it, but the NVA would see him in the next 10 seconds and cut him down. There was a third option, the one that made tactical sense. The one Brackett's training said was correct. Let Trung draw the enemy's fire. Use the distraction to break contact and escape while they were focused on the Montagnard. Sacrifice one to save one. Cold calculus, the kind of decision that keeps you alive in denied territory. What would you do? Not in theory, not in a classroom at Fort Bragg with an instructor waiting for the right answer. Right now. Your teammate, the man who saved your life twice, who trusted you enough to join an American unit operating in places his own government barely acknowledged, is bleeding out and trying to reach you. The enemy's seconds from spotting him. You have maybe 4 seconds to decide. Do you fire and die together? Do you stay quiet and let him die alone? Do you run and live with that choice for the next 50 years? There's no manual for this. No tactical doctrine. Just you, your weapon, and a choice that will define everything that comes after. What do you do? Brackett made his decision before his conscious mind caught up. The promise to Hodges wasn't just about keeping people alive. It was about refusing to become the kind of soldier who calculated lives like ammunition counts. He rose from the crater. The XM-177E2 came up. He didn't aim at the NVA positions he'd already identified. He aimed at where his instincts said the flanking element was moving. And he opened fire. The jungle exploded. Again, returned fire from multiple positions. Brackett's burst caught the flanking soldier mid-step. The man went down, but the cost was immediate. Every NVA soldier in the area now knew exactly where Brackett was. Rounds tore into the crater's edge, impacted the ground around him. He dropped flat and low-crawled laterally, changed position, fired again, short burst, shifted. The Montagnard Trung used the chaos to sprint the last 20 meters. He dove into the crater, alive, bleeding, but alive. Trung looked at Brackett. No words, just understanding. The kind that passes between men who've operated together long enough to communicate without speaking. They both knew what this meant. Brackett had chosen, and the choice was going to cost them everything. Hodges' promise, nobody goes home in a bag, had just become impossible to keep. Because now there were 2 of them. 2 targets, wounded, low on ammunition, with NVA reinforcements inbound. The promise had been broken the moment Brackett pulled the trigger, but he'd made it anyway, and he'd do it again. Because some things matter more than survival. Now they had to figure out how to live long enough to make that choice mean something. The game changer came in the form of noise, not gunfire. Rotor blades, faint, distant, but growing louder. A Huey, maybe 2. Extraction birds. Someone had heard the firefight. Maybe another SOG team operating in the area. Maybe a reaction force monitoring radio frequencies for distress calls that Brackett couldn't send because his radio was destroyed. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the NVA heard it too, and Lieutenant Thao understood immediately what it meant. If those helicopters reached this position, they'd extract the Americans and this entire operation. The ambush, the casualties, the tactical failure of letting 1 isolated soldier kill 6 trained regulars would be for nothing. Thao made his own impossible choice. Assault now, accept casualties, overwhelm the position before the helicopters arrived. He screamed orders. The remaining NVA soldiers, 5 combat effective, 1 wounded, rose from cover and charged, not recklessly, with covering fire and tactical movement, but charging nonetheless. 20 meters, 15, close enough that Brackett could see their faces, young, determined, terrified, men who'd been told this was supposed to be a simple kill mission and found themselves in a close-quarters nightmare instead. Brackett's XM-177E2 was running low. Maybe 40 rounds left across 2 magazines. Trung pulled his sidearm, a Browning high power, with his good hand. 13 rounds. They were about to find out if 53 bullets could stop 5 charging soldiers. Brackett shifted to semi-auto, controlled fire. Not the spray and pray of full auto. Every round had to count. He picked the lead soldier, center mass, squeezed. The man dropped, shifted to the second, fired, hit, shifted again. This was the kill zone, the moment when training and muscle memory took over completely. There was no thought, no fear, just target acquisition and trigger press, over and over. The world narrowed to sights and breathing and recoil. Trung fired beside him, slower, more deliberate, each shot a decision. The NVA soldiers realized too late that they were dying. 2 more went down in the first 5 seconds. The last 2 tried to retreat. Brackett tracked them, fired. 1 dropped. The other made it to cover, the same teak log they'd been hiding behind earlier. Wounded, alone, the only survivor of Thao's assault. And then the helicopters were overhead. 2 Hueys, door gunners already engaging. M60 machine gun fire ripped into the jungle around the NVA position. The wounded soldier didn't stand a chance. He tried to run, didn't make it 10 meters. The M60 cut him down. Efficient, brutal, final. The lead helicopter descended. Brackett grabbed Trung and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the landing zone. His legs were shaking now. Adrenaline dump. The crash that comes when your body realizes it's not dying anymore. They reached the Huey. Hands pulled them aboard. The crew chief was screaming something, but Brackett couldn't hear over the rotor wash. They lifted off. The jungle fell away. And for the first time in 72 hours, James Brackett wasn't alone. 2 minutes, 12 men, no backup. That's what it came down to. Not firepower, not technology, not superior numbers. Just one man who refused to quit when quitting was the only logical choice. Who understood that tactical victory sometimes means accepting the cost of tactical insanity. Who made the enemy believe he was a platoon-sized element when he was just a specialist 4-class from Tupelo, Mississippi, with a promise to keep and nothing left to lose. The phrase that would follow him wasn't anything grand. It was what Trung said as they cleared Laotian airspace. 2 words, barely audible over the engine noise. Thank you. Because Brackett could have run, could have saved himself, but he'd chosen differently. And sometimes that's the only victory that matters. From the NVA perspective, this wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was a psychological earthquake. Lieutenant Thao's entire squad, 12 experienced regulars who'd successfully eliminated 4 American reconnaissance teams in 3 months, had been destroyed by what the official report would call an unknown-sized enemy force, because no one in Hanoi's command structure could accept that one soldier had done this. They upgraded security along the entire trail sector, doubled patrols, changed communication protocols, all because of 2 minutes of violence that shattered their confidence in their own invincibility. The stakes that had seemed abstract in Block 3, strategic denial, trail interdiction, proving American special operations could operate in denied territory, resolved themselves in the most concrete way possible. Brackett didn't stop the trail. He didn't change the war. But he proved that one well-trained operator with the will to fight could survive anything. And that proof mattered to SOG Command, to future missions, to every reconnaissance team that would insert into Laos after this, knowing that survival wasn't just possible, it was achievable if you refused to accept defeat. The question from Block 3, how do you win when you're surrounded, had its answer. You don't win by escaping. You win by making them pay so dearly that victory becomes Pyrrhic. You win by surviving. And you win by choosing to save your teammate even when logic says you can't. But winning came with a price. And Brackett was about to learn what that price looks like. 12 North Vietnamese soldiers dead. Brackett knew their number, but not their names. The official after-action report listed them as enemy KIA, but they'd been men with families, with homes, with reasons for fighting that made sense to them, even if those reasons were invisible to the American who killed them. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Thao, 36, from a village outside Hanoi, father of 2, veteran of 20 years of continuous warfare, dead in a Laotian jungle defending a supply route he believed kept his country alive. His radio man, maybe 22, maybe younger, whose last act was trying to call for help. The flanking element's point man who moved with such professional skill that Brackett had respected his competence even while putting rounds into him. 6 more whose faces Brackett saw in the muzzle flashes. The 2 who charged during Thao's final assault and died within meters of their objective. The wounded soldier who tried to run when the helicopters arrived and got cut down by M60 fire from the door gunner. Each one represented someone's son, someone's brother, someone's husband or father. The North Vietnamese weren't abstract enemies. They were soldiers doing their duty with courage and discipline, and they died because Brackett was better at killing than they were at killing him. On the American side, Trung survived, medevaced to a field hospital in Thailand, lost the arm, lived. The rest of Recon Team Python, 4 Americans, 3 Montagnards, extracted 36 hours later from an alternate exfiltration point 15 kilometers south. Everyone made it out, against all odds, against tactical probability. But everyone didn't include the version of themselves they'd been before the mission. You don't split your team under fire and come back the same. 0 American combat deaths on this operation. The Pentagon would call it a success. MACV-SOG would classify the entire event under human protocols that wouldn't be declassified for decades. The official record would note 1 reconnaissance element successfully extracted after contact with unknown-sized enemy force. The truth, that a single soldier killed 12 men in under 2 minutes, would remain buried because it raised questions about what kind of training produces that capability, and what happens to the men who discover they have it. The battlefield aftermath looked like every battlefield. Brass casings scattered around the crater, blood soaked into the red clay, the smell of cordite mixing with jungle rot, the silence that comes when violence stops and nature slowly, cautiously starts making noise again. Brackett's XM-177E2 was still hot when they loaded him onto the helicopter. He'd fired 137 rounds. He counted later, reloaded 6 times in 2 minutes. His hands were shaking now, delayed shock. The crew chief wrapped him in a poncho liner even though it was 90 degrees. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. The 3 notches carved into his rifle's handguard felt obscene now. He'd added 12 more without marking them, without wanting to mark them. Hodges had been right. This wasn't deer hunting. This wasn't keeping score. This was staying alive by making other people's families grieve. And the weight of that didn't get lighter just because the shooting stopped. Trung looked at him from the other side of the Huey's cargo bay. One-armed, bleeding, alive because Brackett had chosen to save him instead of escaping. The Montagnard nodded once, slow, deliberate, an acknowledgement that carried more weight than any medal citation ever could. Brackett had kept the promise to Hodges. Nobody else went home in a bag. But the cost of keeping that promise was carved into his hands, his mind, his ability to ever feel normal again. The helicopter crossed back into South Vietnam. Officially, none of this had happened. Officially, no American soldiers operated in Laos. Officially, James Brackett had spent the last 72 hours at a fire base in the Central Highlands filling out maintenance reports. The lie was paperwork. The truth was 12 dead men, and the knowledge that survival sometimes requires becoming someone your past self wouldn't recognize. Hodges's promise, nobody goes home in a bag, had been kept. But Brackett understood now that the promise had a loophole. You could survive without coming home. You could walk around breathing and talking and following orders while the part of you that knew how to feel human stayed back in that Laotian jungle. The object he carried, his rifle with its unmarked wood, would stay with him for years, long after he rotated back to the States, long after MACV-SOG disbanded and the war ended and the official denial became permanent. The weight never got lighter. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to years, and 2 minutes of violence defined everything that came after. James Brackett rotated home in March of 1969, 25 years old, 2 tours, Specialist 4 class with a footlocker full of classified citations he couldn't talk about and memories he couldn't share. The transition was brutal. His family asked where he'd been. He said, "Radio operator, Central Highlands." They asked if he saw combat. He said, "Some." They asked if he was okay. He said, "Fine." All lies by omission, necessary lies. The kind that protect people from truths they're not cleared to know. The nightmares started within a month. Not every night, just the ones when he let his guard down. He'd wake up counting muzzle flashes. 12. Always 12. His wife, he'd married his high school girlfriend after returning, trying to rebuild something normal, learned not to touch him when he was sleeping. He'd wake up swinging. Once, he nearly broke her wrist before his conscious mind caught up to his muscle memory. She left after 2 years. He didn't blame her. You can't build a life with someone who's still fighting a war that officially never happened. The VA tried. PTSD wasn't called that in 1970. They called it adjustment disorder and prescribed pills that made him numb without making him better. Group therapy with Vietnam veterans who'd served in line units and couldn't understand why a radio operator would have these problems. He never told them the truth, never explained that he wasn't a radio operator, that the job title was cover for operations that would stay classified for 40 years. He carried it alone. Survivor's guilt hit him hardest on the anniversaries. The day Hodges died, the day the ambush happened, the day Trung lost his arm. He'd try to convince himself that he'd made the right choices, that saving Trung was worth exposing his position, that killing 12 men to survive wasn't murder. It was combat. But conviction and peace are different things. You can be right and still be haunted. He found work that didn't require talking much. Construction, night security, jobs where his hands stayed busy and his mind had fewer opportunities to drift back to Laos. He never wore his uniform again, never joined veterans organizations, never marched in parades. He'd served honorably but couldn't reconcile the honor with the cost. 20 years after the war, a researcher contacted him. Declassification of MACV-SOG operations had begun. They wanted his story for the record. He refused. Some things don't belong in books. James Brackett served with exceptional courage and skill. So did the men hunting him. Lieutenant Nguyen Van Thou and his squad did their duty with professionalism that deserved recognition even from their enemies. The courage of one side doesn't diminish the courage of the other. Both can be true. Both should be remembered. War creates heroes on every side. It also creates tragedies on every side. The soldiers did their part with bravery that transcends politics and policy. The fault, when there was fault, lay in the decisions made far from the jungle. in strategies that sent men to die in places their countries would later deny they'd been, in objectives that seemed clear in Washington and Hanoi, but became impossible moral tangles in the mud and blood of actual combat. The question isn't whether the soldiers fought with honor. They did. The question is whether the leaders who sent them there did their part with equal integrity. Brackett died in 2019, 74 years old, heart attack, quiet funeral in Tupelo, no military honors because his service records were still partially classified. His children found the XM-177E2 in his closet, deactivated, legal, but unmistakably the weapon from his tours. 3 notches on the handguard, only 3. He'd never added the other 12, maybe because adding them would make it real in a way he couldn't accept. Maybe because the weight didn't need marking. It was already permanent. The cost he paid in that Laotian jungle, 2 minutes that redefined his relationship with violence and survival, he carried for 50 years. The memories never faded. The weight never got lighter. But he'd kept the promise to Hodges. Nobody else went home in a bag. And in the end, that mattered. Not because it made the cost bearable, but because some promises are worth keeping even when they break you. If you served, their sacrifice was real. Subscribe and remember, honor the warriors, question the wars,